On September 19, 1924, a boy named Arthur Lee Longnaker was born. He lived in Steelton, Pennsylvania, under his mother and father's roof.
My dad's name was Hiram Alexander Longnaker, and my mother's was Carrie E. Longnaker. My dad, for quite a while, was the chief of police in the borough of Steelton. And then later on, he moved into administration.
On the night of December 7th, 1941, Mr. Longnaker was listening to the radio and writing a letter to a brother-in-law in the service. While listening to the radio, he heard that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. Mr. Longnaker was shocked when he heard this news. From that moment on, the draft of 18-year-olds was being considered greatly because the United States had just entered World War II. He kept reading in the paper about the draft and was not surprised when he got the letter in the mail to report for the first round of physicals that was to be examined. He saw that many of his classmates were there as well. Suddenly, he wasn't so nervous to enter the military.
When he entered the Army Air Force, he began his basic training at Miami Beach in Florida. He got up every morning at about 4:45 or 6, and he would run down the stairs from the 14th floor for roll call. After roll call came breakfast. After breakfast, he would have a little bit of time to himself, and then Mr. Longnaker would march to the drill fields about a mile away. While walking in his flight, they would sing songs. One day, while singing and marching to the fields, they got a command to eyes right, and there was Betty Grable, a famous movie star during the time, waving at him. His specialized training included going to the General Motors Pratt & Whitney School, where he learned everything he needed to know about engines and planes.
An engine mechanic. And then from there, I applied for further training, and I was sent to General Motors Pratt & Whitney Engine School in Detroit, Michigan. And what we did there was we completely disassembled an R1830 engine and put it through all the lab tests and then put it back together. And then we were taken out to Willow Run plant and we hooked up our engine. There was 3 guys to an engine. We hooked it up and we ran it. And you had to have it run in order to pass. And I think we had our engine running within about 2 hours. So then we had the rest of the week to help others who had difficulty and couldn't find out what it was. But that was an excellent school.
The time spent at this school was very useful because it prepared him for the life on the base as an engineer.
He was stationed at Shepherd's Base first. Conditions at the base weren't very nice. Mr. Longnaker recalled the drinking water as the worst he had ever had.
But Shepherd's Field had the worst drinking water I've ever had in my life. That was so bad.
He also said that the food was not very good either. If his flight was the last to eat, he normally got peanut butter and jelly because the base didn't have enough of the main course for everyone to eat. On this base, he also worked under a woman to which he could not remember her name. Even though she was a woman, Mr. Longnaker treated her as he would have treated any other boss. She was a well-rounded engineer who knew what she was talking about.
My first assignment on the flight line, there was they flipped a coin to see who would go this way, and the other 2 guys won, and I went over, and I heard some of the gang in this flight shack, they're waiting for their assignments. They began to giggle, and then he says, okay, Longnaker, you're going to work for Corporal so-and-so. I wished I could remember her name. She was a very good, very talented, and she had actually gone through aircraft engineering, taken, I think, 2 years college in it. And I learned a lot from her. She had about 3 planes that she was a crew chief on. And I worked for her for about 4 months and never had a problem. I learned a lot from her. And eventually she volunteered to go overseas somewhere, and that cost her life. Somewhere over, she was involved in some sort of a bombing, and it cost her life. But I always respected her. I had no problem working for her, accepting orders.
Being in charge of about 12 men, he wasn't really respected because he was young. He always made his crew do their work to the full amount of work that the planes needed to be fixed, because he didn't want to be held accountable for anything that happened to the pilot in a plane he didn't fix properly. Maintaining planes was a lot of work, and since Mr. Longnaker was a rather small man, he could get into the plane's nooks and crannies easier than all of his staff. Being in charge of his men led to new bonds and friendships.
Throughout his experiences during World War I, Mr. Longnaker made many friends, some of which he continued talking to after the war was over.
Did you make any special bonds with the men you worked with?
Oh yes, I had some friends that I still contacted even up to like a year or two ago.
Along with staying in touch with his friends from the service, Mr. Longnaker also stayed in touch with his family. He contacted them mostly by mail because there was no postage charge for those in the service.
Mostly by mail. If you're a serviceman, there was no postage charge. And that was the easiest way. If you wanted to telephone, it was almost always a problem. They did not have that many telephones, and then if you got on there, you know, feeling sorry for the long-distance operators, it would take them a while to place a call, and when they did, then you know they would say try to limit it to 3 minutes. Well, that was impossible. If you came from a big family, everyone wanted to talk to you. So I went more by the mail. I'd love to get a letter.
Whenever Mr. Longnaker had free time, he would try to make the most of it. Depending on the time of the year and where he was, there were different activities.
Winter sports going on, and we had our own basketball team, hockey team, baseball team. There was always something to do, much like if you're in school. And then they had classes. You could attend a class on the base, things like that.
After 6 years of being in the service, Mr. Longnaker was finally able to return home. It took him some time to get used to this everyday life again. When he came home, he could no longer be boss of people around him like he was used to.
It was hard adjusting for a couple weeks. It was, you know, completely different, and especially like
the lessons Mr. Longnaker learned during his time of service paid off in the long run.
I was telling people what to do. I had to readjust. So I'd say understanding people. I learned. I was very naive when I went into service. Very naive, and that helped me to understand. Well, you're going to work in a place where they got 50 people. There's going to be 50 different people there. And it was interesting, but someone has advised me one time in there, pick out their good points and concentrate on them. And that's what we did.
Mr. Longnaker was later offered to rejoin the Army Air Force and nearly did. When it came time for his discharge, he was offered Master Sergeant but declined. He instead left and later received many different medals and patches. He received a Victory Medal for the win of World War II and a Good Conduct Medal for a year straight of good conduct. He took many things with him, including his memories and lessons learned, and his newfound skills. Later he got married and had a daughter. Mr. Longnaker is still alive and well today. We would like to thank you, Mr. Longnaker, for your services.